Hey, good morning. Welcome to the office hour. Sorry I was a little bit late. Had some technical difficulties just trying to get my mic together, and this mic isn't even on. And my other camera was messed up. So, anyway, just getting here this morning. Good to be here. Thanks for tuning in. And hopefully you can hear me all right. I know it's probably a little quieter, but I have to go off the mic on my computer. So, start today. Get myself a little centered here before we go into this. And start with a little bit of I Ching. So today is dispersion or dissolution, and disperse hard attitudes with gentleness. So the hexagram Huan comes to indicate there are rigidity and harshness present, either in yourself or others, and that they should be dissolved now for the benefit of all. Whenever we fall into a negative state, such as judgment, fear, anger, anxiety, or desire, our attitude becomes structured and inflexible. As long as we remain in this condition, we cannot receive the assistance of the higher power. Therefore, if we wish to return to good fortune now, we must take steps to dissolve the hardness. The image of Huan is that of warm spring wind steadily dissolving winter ice. It is meant to teach us that through perseverance and gentleness, rather than aggressiveness, we can overcome what is hard. The I Ching counsels the use of religious forces now. Employ music, prayer, meditation, a common project, or some other form of sacred concentration or ceremony to release pent-up energy in yourself and others. Allow harsh and unforgiving feelings to be carried away by the song of a flute, the reverberation of a drum, or the sound of the wind through the trees. In your mind's eye, see where the flow of positive energy is blocked, and then imagine this place as an ice floe breaking up in a thawing river. Unfortunately, until the inflexibility is removed, there can be no unity either within your own spirit, with others, or with the sage. Remember that inferior emotions are hard, where the attitude of the superior person, acceptance, detachment, modesty, innocence, and equanimity, have a quality of softness to them. By returning to this now, you ensure your own good fortune. So good to see you guys. Or I guess you're seeing me, but and wanted to start off with a question from last week. I was kind of this morning going through these, and had a question here. It was talking about last week we talked about storing seawater, but there was also a second question there that was talking about fermenting seawater. And so looking here at Master Cho's old recipe book, I'm just going to read to you the recipe for fermented seawater, which says mix seawater diluted 1 to 30, mix in some rice water at a dilution of 1 to 200, and mix in KNF Food, also known as fermented plant juice, and he recommends that you use mugwort or dropwort at a dilution of 1 to 500. And so mix all that together and keep the mixture for half a day in the summer, and for 2 to 3 days if it's cloudy or a bit cooler. And then he says use the mixture when it becomes whitish like haze. And so the rice wash water, if you're not familiar, that's the same process you use when you make the KNF protectors, when you're getting the rice starch off the water. So you just take rice, put it in water, and stir it around, until you get that cloudy water, and that's the rice wash water that he's recommending you put in this at 1 to 200 dilution. And then it says here how to use the fermented seawater, although it doesn't really, it says the fermented seawater prevents and controls anthracnose, which is a common root-eating fungal problem. And he also recommends you add IMO4, KNF medicine, and KNF structure to the fermented seawater for increased microbial activity. So a little bit on fermented seawater. It's a pretty easy thing to make, and yeah. So the rest of this recipe in here, he's talking about how to use seawater itself. So kind of covered that last time. And next question here was from GoPro, and she was asking about how do I make brown rice vinegar, and that's kind of an easy one to do. What I do is I take like a finished fermented plant juice, a KNF Food, and make that one third of a bucket, and then add 2/3 water to fill it up, and that will then ferment into a vinegar. So I typically use I'll try to make like banana fruit food, and then use that in there to how my audio's low, the microphone closer. I guess I can put this thing closer. I don't really need my keyboard right here, and it's probably also the fan is spinning like crazy, I bet. But my usual mic is out, so I will try to put this closer and try to make that happen. Sorry about that. I didn't sound check prior to this. I was trying to get all the questions together, and just didn't sound check to get my mic on, so apologize again about that. So hopefully this is a little bit better. I did put it significantly closer to myself. So anyway, the vinegar is the fermented plant juice or the KNF Food, and then 2/3 water, and then to that you can add a SCOBY, which you can get from a finished vinegar that you already have. The SCOBYs look like these discs, like if you made kombucha, you've seen these kind of pancake solid gelatinous things forming in there. Those are the SCOBYs. If you don't have one of those, you can also accelerate your vinegar by taking a apple cider vinegar, like the organic one they sell at the store, and just pouring a little bit of that vinegar in as a starter to help it along. So so hopefully that answered that on the brown rice vinegar. And someone, I think, GoPro, you're on today too. Hey, how's it? You were saying you just got your naruk and about to begin makgeolli. So it's a good process to make it. Making the traditional brown rice vinegar is always recommended, but if you don't have access to brown rice, doing it from any fruit, so taking making apple cider vinegar, or making coconut vinegar, or in my case I make a lot of banana vinegar. Any of those are really good. So next question here was from Tomahato33, and he's saying that he lives near Seattle, and it's a four-hour drive to the ocean, but it's only 10 minutes to the Puget Sound, which has brackish water. And he read that using brackish water in place of seawater is okay. So I just want to talk a little bit about seawater, the difference in seawater versus brackish water. If you're using brackish water, there's probably more microbial life in it because as the one of the most fertile places on the planet is where the seawater is mixing with fresh water in the river, like estuary type of places. And I would imagine that in this case, the Puget Sound acts as a giant estuary where freshwater and saltwater are mixing. So there's probably higher microbial activity, microbial life happening. So in that case, it's happening kind of in the top quarter inch to inch of the sea. There's not that much microbial activity happening down deeper. So if you are going to gather seawater and you want to gather the most microbial activity, you want to gather, when you go to get your seawater, just try to skim the very top of the water off and collect that. And that being your best chance to get the most microbial activity. And the microbial activity can be hugely beneficial because there's basically two sets of microbes around. There's freshwater microbes and there's saltwater microbes. And so if you're taking the saltwater microbes and bringing those up onto your land, then it's like mixing in a whole nother diverse culture. And you can use this seawater that you've collected with a bunch of microbes to kind of revitalize your land. And this is an analogy that's real apropos to living here in Hawaii because we're on an island, and it's like, it's a small town, and if you've dated every person around and you're trying to look for a partner, it's kind of hard because everyone has relations with each other and set in their ways. But imagine putting this seawater on your land is like bringing in a busload of exotic tourists that are wanting to live there. And so it brings in this opportunity for more diversity to happen. So the soil microbes that are living there meet these new seawater microbes, and they're able to interact enough to reproduce, and it helps to increase your diversity of the microbial population. And again, that seawater is always diluted 1 to 30, or in some cases, for the ripening solution, it's diluted about 1 to 15, but it's always diluted before you put it to the land so that you don't cause salinity problems. And to go back to the collection of seawater, the other reason to gather seawater is to get minerals back on your land. And the minerals you would want to grab from a lower strata of seawater if possible. So if you're not trying to go for the microbial life, you want to get more the sea minerals, then gather it from below the surface. And I've been told by certain people that about 10 feet below the seawater is much cleaner place to gather it because a lot of the pollution and everything mixes on the top of the seawater. But that if you can get seawater from 10 feet down, you can get beneath that layer that's been kind of contaminated with things like Fukushima leaking in the ocean, and you see the Pacific garbage patch of plastic that tends to float up in the top 10 feet. All these microplastics and things tend to float up in the top 10 feet unless they settle down to the bottom. So the bottom of the ocean. So if you're gathering just 10 feet below the ocean, you're gathering a very high mineral rich ocean to get these minerals out of there. So that's also grabbing the minerals from deeper is also similar to reconstituting seawater. So when you reconstitute it that way, you're also getting a lot of minerals. So that's taking sea salt and mixing it with seawater. And to reconstitute seawater, you'd add between 30 and 35 grams per liter of sea salt to make seawater. So want to jump back here to the live a little bit and answer some of these questions coming over. So GoPro again, you did ask about the BRV, so that's that's good. Kind of answered that already. Oh, you think the time change has something to do with this? Healing Earth. Actually, in Hawaii, we don't have daylight savings, so it's the same time for me. It's just I should have just been in the office earlier getting these things set up. I apologize about that, but yeah, Hawaii doesn't have daylight savings time. It's really it's a nice thing. We don't have to set our clocks. They're always Hawaiian time. So how long do you let the makgeolli keep fermenting? I've never made the brown rice vinegar using the makgeolli process. Um, However, to answer that, if another way to make the brown rice vinegar, as I was saying, was to take um, the 1/3 plant juice, the 2/3 water. But the other way you can do it is in that you can put it in like I just leave it open to the air because if it's aerobic fermentation, it'll turn to vinegar. However, you can seal it and make it anaerobic. So cut off the oxygen and put on a release valve so the air will go out, but air won't come in. You can get those at brewing stores, and you can convert that instead of just letting it go straight from the plant juice and water to vinegar. You can actually convert it to an alcohol, which can happen quicker, and then you can expose that to oxygen, and the alcohol will then convert to vinegar. So that's like a makgeolli type process, and I think that's about 2 weeks of being exposed to the oxygen. All your alcohol will convert over to being vinegar. I'm not entirely sure because I don't do it that way, but I've heard of it and I know that it is possible to do that way. And so Healing Earth, oh, and you're saying you want the wine and BRV. Yeah, I would definitely maybe just keep the wine and then make BRV from other things that are a bit cheaper and easier to do. And yeah, Healing Earth is saying it's easier to buy these vinegars, and sometimes it is. You can get high quality brown rice vinegar in like gallon containers, fairly inexpensive. And when I was in the Philippines, they had coconut vinegar for just really inexpensive. So that's a good choice. That's pretty affordable to do. Making it large scale on a farm, I often make it from just farm waste to make vinegars. So Healing Earth is asking, what are the dropwort and mugwort replacements? Is cucumber one of them? And the dropwort and mugwort are chosen by Master Cho for specific reasons. He mentions these because what they have in them are specific properties that the dropwort is really. I'm going to read it to you right here. Let's see. He says it produces a lot of juice, but somewhere in here in his book, he's talking about how. Here. Okay, so here he's talking about mugwort. So what he says is, even though there's a slight difference between regions, it is best to pick from the end of March to April, when the Japanese mugwort is full of energy. So he's talking about certain times to pick it, but I believe in this book as well, he does talk about these things. Okay, so so the mugwort is strong against both cold and heat, and has good vitality and a good amount of iron. The Japanese mugwort is used for giving vitality to the crops when they sprout buds at the end of the dormant period in spring. Japanese mugwort revitalizes plants in this way. So he's using the mugwort especially when he's doing plant tips. You know, so here in Hawaii, what I tend to use for that same thing is something like sweet potato shoots, and also bamboo shoots to use for these young emergent things. But he's saying that the mugwort is really good for, you know, when things are first budding up, and in your first plant juice you would use during spring or when you're sowing seeds, um, would be from a mugwort. And then here on the dropwort, he's saying dropwort is full of iron and manganese, which are good for blood circulation, stimulating the peripheral nervous system, and recovery from injury. So dropwort is typically given to women after they have childbirth as well, as a tea. And so these types of properties, when you ask, is the cucumber a replacement for dropwort or mugwort, you have to look at these types of properties that are what, you know, what do people say about cucumbers? You know, it helps. When I hear about cucumbers, you know, I think of people putting it on their eyes when they're spawing, and it's also helps with like wrinkles and those types of things, kind of this rejuvenation factor with cucumbers. And so any plant material that you're taking, you can kind of look these things up, different nutrition facts or different, you know, like remedies of what do people use these things for, and those are what you're looking for. So is cucumber a replacement for both of these? I would say, yeah, I'm, you know, not necessarily. Each plant has its own specific unique properties that it brings. And so looking at, you know, what they do and what they're good for, you know, each of them has their place, and nothing can really replace any of them, but you can get approximates to what they are. Hey, Tyler's here. Hey man, we got to have your video last time. And he's asking, what are my favorite herbs for using KNF medicines for medicinal purposes? What ratios do you take them? And he knows that I've mentioned comfrey previously and love the chats. And yeah, thanks. Shout out to you and Hannah for sure. Hope things are going good in Oklahoma. And so what are my favorite herbs for using? Someone mentioned it the other day. It's the herb that I can't talk about without being demonetized on here. That's a great one to use. But herbs that we've made KNF foods out of are, oregano is a great one. Oregano tends to be kind of anti-parasitic. It's also very like spicy and heating, so it can you know, increase your immune system in a lot of ways like that. I've made a ferment from rosemary, which is delicious to add to salads and those types of things as a dressing. It's also kind of wild to eat it. Not sure the exact properties of it. I've heard it helps with memory, so maybe if I drank more of it, I'd remember more of the properties. And then also in herb we use a lot is basil, and I make it from the basil flowers, which is you know, just helps those flowering things. Again, it's great as a salad dressing as well. Any of these herbal things are kind of sweet, and they mix a little vinegar in there and drizzle some fermented plant juice on there, and you've got a great salad dressing. Also, I really like the comfrey fermented plant juice. KNF Food, it really is a good thing, and especially delicious on pancakes. So putting those things together are good. So hopefully I've answered the question. There's a couple more on the vinegar, but hopefully I've kind of gone over that pretty extensively. So someone's mentioning here, Mark Smith is saying, I have a lot of weeds that are drought resistant. Making fermented plant juice from them should help others that are not so hardy. And yes, so sometimes that's a little bit hippy dippy to say, and like ooby and out there of like, you know, how does this actually function? So if I have a plant that's drought resistant and I make a fermented plant juice, what you're doing is you're extracting all the enzymes and hormones and the different plant chemicals that are in there. And then when you spray it onto another plant, because it went through that fermentation process, the other plant doesn't have to digest and break it down. It can just immediately absorb all of those compounds directly into it. So that's the way you're transferring these things that are like these properties across, because it's not only just the chemicals, like say like, I was talking about the dropwort and there's manganese in it. Like, sure, there's that chemical element of that, but there's also these growth hormones and enzymes that also give the plant these characteristics. And those are the things that are more absorbable in this way, to transfer these abilities across and to bring them across. So it's not just so like out there and weird. You're actually, if you do a good fermented plant juice, you make a good KNF food, you can then transfer it, and that's how it's working. So it's more than just the chemical level. It's up into like these compounds, these molecules that are super complex, and you can give. So it's a great idea if if you're in the desert and you go out and you get like some sagebrush and other things that are growing out there, maybe even some cactus, and make those into fermented plant juice, and then transfer those and spray those on your other crops that aren't as attuned to the desert. You'll probably get some of that happening, and it's kind of a hand-waving theory of how it happens, but it definitely works. So give it a try and try it there. So Stonemason 7767 is asking, is there a way to jumpstart a pile of IMO 4 that won't heat back up? IMO 3 went well, added dirt, water, and nutrients, and nothing happened. Okay, so one thing is that I'm not sure if it was an older pile of the IMO 3. If you go immediately into it, it kind of helps that activity. Also, you may have added more dirt than you should have. Sometimes it's like in my piles, if they're not heating up, it's not enough dirt. So one way to kind of jump start the pile. Yeah, Sue's yelling at me that it's I said that backwards, so apparently just reverse what I just said. But I've jump started these piles by just spraying a little bit of KNF fuel and also a little lactobacillus on the top of these piles after they're going, and that kind of gives it enough like party food to kick back up. But the last 2 or 3 IMO 4 piles that I've made have actually been low temperature piles, that they didn't actually heat up the same way that the IMO 3 did. They actually stayed at about 100 to 110 degrees, somewhere between there, and just went. And the microbes were active. You reached into the pile and it was above ambient temperature, and it turned out to be this nice ambient pile that after about 10-12 days, it started to cool down and was it smelled just like the fungal, like you're walking in the forest and you got that nice fungus. So my nose knows that those batches turned out and they worked, even though they happened at this low temperature and they were static. And I think part of the problem with those were that we turned it too early, that the microbes were taking off, they were going to heat up, but then I disturbed the pile by turning it too early. And some folks on the internet will recommend that you turn your pile like almost immediately, and for sure turn it the first day and all this stuff, but it's really based on the temperature and the temperature profile. And if you do turn it too early, you may interrupt those microbes, because the action of turning it, what heats up a pile is these microbes are making love with each other. They're right next to each other, they're making love, they found a good partner, they're starting to heat up, they're starting to reproduce, they're starting to create that diversity in that pile. And if I turn it, I'm going to break that apart. And it's like interrupting people right in the moment of their action and their heat. And it's hard to get back in your groove, to get right back in, to continue to reproduce in that manner. So So if you're turning it preemptively and too early, and you're just turning it because you're following a recipe versus watching the temperature or using your hand as a temperature, because you'll know when things are above 120. You can't keep your hand in the pile; it's too hot. You'll immediately have to pull your hand out. Um, and if it's not in that range, you may interrupt that lovemaking, and then it can never kick off to that level. So do be careful turning them too early. That could be another thing, and it could be that you've added a little bit too much dirt to it. And you're also saying that it's a little cold here in Indiana, high 40s, low in the 28s. So if it is that cold, definitely try to insulate your pile. Like even putting like a old sleeping bag or something on top and surrounding it with some like hay bales or something that you can, or straw bales that you can really insulate your pile to keep it. It's just like us, if we were sleeping outside in the low, the high 40s to low 28s, we'd freeze. The microbes are very similar to us, so give them a little bit more insulation, or pile up some straw above your pile so you can really give it that insulation, that things that it needs. And Tyler Fry is here all the way from, we visited Tyler last on the Aloha tour. So I had a Felicia for me, Tyler. Good to see you guys. Hope everything's going well with the winery and your grow up there. So we got another question here. Do you make EM to use in KNF, or is that not a thing we use? I have EM but want some EM5. What do I add for that? Okay, so EM is typically a collection of lactobacillus, purple non-sulfur bacteria, and yeasts. So in natural farming, even though it's not one of the core solutions, of the 9 core solutions, it is in Master Cho's old recipe book here, and it's yeast here. So in natural farming, we do use lactobacillus, and we also use yeast. So these two things are commonly are used. Yeast is used more rarely because it's a little bit more esoteric in how it's used, but they are there. And so by using these two things in natural farming, you're going to get benefit. One of the things, it's compatible. It's the thing about it is that, similar to just using too much lactobacillus or too much yeast, is these microbes are very powerful, and you can sometimes eat out the nutrition in the system that would inhibit then the indigenous microbes from, like it ate their food. It's just like you bring a bunch of like specialized engineers into a place, they may eat and steal all the jobs from your civilians and stuff, and then they're gonna leave and ship the money elsewhere. And coming from Hawaii, I'm pretty familiar with this type of stuff. But you just want to be careful not to overuse it. And if you are using EMs and all those things, be sure to use the maintenance solution, which is the food, the medicine, the cleanser, and the structure. And if you're always spraying microbes plus these foods, you will have what you need to be doing, to keep your EM there. And EM is, in terms of like what I call it like the protectors. Again, it's going to be those doing what they're, like protection type of stuff. So since I got into yeast and you guys are here tuned in, yeast isn't talked about that often, but I'm gonna read to you a little bit about the function of yeast. So yeast is a microorganism which is in charge of the last step of fermentation. Yeast breaks down sugars into alcohol and carbon dioxide, which is ethanol fermentation, which is a necessary process. Sorry, this book is a little Kringlish. Yeast enhances metabolism and expands capillary vessels. Yeast functions to resynthesize organic substances decomposed by various microbes into amino acids, hormones, vitamins, etc., which are beneficial to the crop. Yeast produces various substances, example, vitamins, nucleic acid, minerals, hormones, and fatty acids in the body. Yeast also produces 8 essential amino acids that humans cannot synthesize. It is healthy to eat many fermented foods containing yeast. Yeast has an excellent ability to decompose chemical fertilizers. Yeast usually sticks onto the fruit surface. Many yeast exist specifically on the grape. So especially since Tyler's here, he runs a winery, his family does, and he's super familiar with, they grow grapes, they have a vineyard. So producing some yeast for your local region using these things. And then also, this is one of the reasons why folks that eat kimchi, at the end of your fermentation, you're getting yeast. Also in the fermented fruit juice recipe, you're getting those yeasts happening. Even in the vinegar, where it's mostly acetic acid or acetobacter bacterias, but those yeasts also develop in a SCOBY. A SCOBY is a symbiotic colony of bacteria and yeast. So anytime you have a SCOBY growing in things, there's yeast present. And so one of the reasons we don't use yeast here as one of the 9 core solutions is that yeast is kind of de facto in all the other solutions. So it's in the fermented plant juice, it's in the KNF foods, it's in your vinegar. That's how the vinegar is able to break down these amino acids as well. So it's not typically mentioned as one of the things, but if you did specifically synthesize yeast and you have it, you can make it. And I'm not going to go over the recipe right here right now, but just to give you an idea of what the benefits of using something like EM, which already contains yeast and has already been symbiotically linked to the lactobacillus and the purple non-sulfur bacteria, which also are super beneficial. Those are just a bit to tell you how all that fits in here. So got a question here, let's see. What is the best way to apply foliar? Does French work too? So maybe drench. Yeah, you were saying drench. French. Do French work too? You gotta get a French person to apply it. No. The best way to apply foliar, it depends on your scale. It's all about making it as easy for you to do as possible, to make it as fun as possible. If it's not easy and it's not fun, you're probably gonna have to pay someone a lot to do it, and or if it's you, it's probably just not gonna get done. So the best way to apply foliar on a small scale is I even use those little small, liter bottle sprayers to just do certain things around the house that need spraying. We have some brand new kava starts that are coming up, and I only have a few of them, so I mix up a little tank and just go spray those. On a larger scale, I don't recommend a backpack sprayer. It's just too heavy to carry on your back, and mixing up that much water, you don't want to carry your water. So I do have like a small 1 gallon to 2 gallons hand sprayer that I'll carry around, and that works well. But what I really do on a larger scale is I use my tractor sprayer, so the tractor is carrying the water, or I use a system where I have a barrel set up, and then from there I run a small pump that runs it out to a hose that then has my sprayer, and so I'm only carrying the hose and the sprayer around, and that runs off a weed whacker engine. And people always ask me what it is. It's if you want to look it up, it's a Maruyama MS75E, and I really should get sponsored by Maruyama because I always promote this thing, and I've probably sold more units of that than anyone else because it's so convenient and so easy to use. And it just burns a little weed whacker 2-stroke engine, and it has plenty of power. And at one time I was running it about over 300 feet long when I was working at a papaya field to go spray. Key with the foliar spray is to spray under the leaves as much as you can. but just soaking the area, soaking the thing. If you are spraying on the plant and it's dripping down, you're over spraying. There's no need to spray that much. You can move quicker, you can spray more easily. It's just to mist it. Like imagine you just get wet, but it's not enough to have it drip down really. That's the level of spraying you want to do. Is it okay to drench? Yes. I do drenching up at my pig pen where I catch water off the roof, and then I drench, and I'm primarily using the seawater in that case. And I talked about this prior, and I'm also using vinegar and KNF Food in there to feed these. And it's a gravity fed 2-inch system that I can basically open it up and it drains 275 gallons in less than 5 minutes. So making it efficient, making it easy. The one thing about drenching is that you have to use about 4 times as much. So for the recommendation for spraying is 25 gallons per acre of foliar spray up into the canopy or onto the plant leaf surface. But drenching is 100 gallons per acre. So because the plant, it's harder for it to go into the soil to pick it up into the plant itself, you have to add more of it. However, if you are drenching, now you're building more of your soil microbes and the whole substrata. So got to think about that too, and there are reasons for drenching. That's why I'm doing that up at my animals, especially with lots of seawater, because I'm trying to rebuild the mineral structure in the soil. So both those are good. Robble Tonewoods is saying, I made FAA about a year ago. While there is breakdown of the fish carcass, there does not seem to be a lot of liquid. I'm assuming too much sugar went into it. Should I add more fish to fix this? You know, I'm not sure on this because I would have to see and maybe see a little video of it to see what was happening. If you're just using straight up bones in the carcass, you're probably not going to get much. The best part of the fish to use for fish amino acid is the heads. The heads have a lot of those fatty acids, those aminos, those things we want. I also use the guts from them, and when I'm getting like fresh ocean fish, the spines are loaded with meat and all these things, and usually I'm getting liquid within like a few days afterward. And at first it smells, pretty fishy, and then eventually it starts to smell smoother. It's hard to describe what smoother smells like, but it gets that more refined, like tastier kind of thing. It's not as fishy smelling as it goes. So I'm not sure why you didn't get that much liquid. I've never had a problem of adding too much sugar to my fish amino acids. What usually happens if you add too much sugar is then it just settles down to the bottom and you get a layer of sugar. It's not like less juice comes out. Usually the juice would come out and the sugar would just drop to the bottom. So it doesn't sound like you've added too much sugar, and I'm not sure exactly what happened here. So hard for me to diagnose without seeing more. But in my case, I've never added too much sugar, and the ratio is usually equal weight. So if I had 100 pounds of fish heads, I'd add 100 pounds of sugar and just layer that through. Don't chop up your fish. It's kind of gross. Just layer it, and you will end up with really good fish amino acid, which I call KNF fuel because it's adds so much energy and fuel to the system. So JK is saying he loves labs. So do I. So should everybody in this world, because they are our protectors. They keep us healthy, and we should get this recipe out to way more people because everybody needs labs. One time, my friend Charlotte had this dream where she saw that I saved the world with LAB. Like everyone had all these problems, and I just taught everyone LAB, and we sprayed it everywhere, and we fixed climate change, we fixed pollution, we got rid of smell, we got healthy, all these solutions for our world. It's, LAB is a crucial part of that. So are the IMOs because they're, they will eventually come in behind the LAB, but everyone should love labs. So shout out to you, JK way to go. So Iceman, I think this is Don from Alaska, is asking about storing IMO 4 cedar box or maybe feed bags. So storing IMO 4 after you're done, and I think there was a question about IMO 3 somewhere in here. I might have skipped it. Let's see here. Anyway, so storing IMO 4 in feed bags, if you are gonna pop some holes in them, just air holes at the bottom so that you can have them so they can breathe, because even though IMO 4 is stable and sleeping, it's not complete, it still needs oxygen. So feed bags are typically waterproof and airproof. So pop some holes in it so that way just with a pen or something, just make holes not big enough that the stuff will spill out, but just so that air will get in there. And then the key is not to like stack them super tall. What I'm doing for my IMO storage is I built a box that's kind of like a raised, it's about a foot or so deep by about 3 feet wide by about 10 feet or 8 feet long. And I just pile it up there. That way it's off the ground, because sometimes my barn does flood and you don't want to have moisture enter the system, and it just sits there and it's aerobic enough. It's not deep enough of a pile to cut off airflow, and it stays aerobic and it stays smelling great. And I can store the IMO for about a year. If there was a question about IMO 3, I just want to tell you right now, I just had a bunch of IMO 3 spoil. And this was a classic thing. Some folks on the internet say that you can store IMO 3 for a long time, but it's not true. You're better off to make IMO 4 and store that for a long time, because once you've mixed it with the soil, the texture becomes different and it's not as open for moths to come in. So what happened to all my IMO 3? It turned into moths. There are now like hundreds of thousands of moths up at my barn. They're starting to get into other things. I created a huge problem by storing this IMO 3, and you want to mix it within a month or two to make IMO 4. 3 months at the latest to mix it, because the IMO 3 still has too much food available, and it will convert over into into bugs and all kinds of things. So that's the reason for not storing it for a long time. Next question here, I guess. Excuse me, I'm getting a little sip of coffee here. Is Mark Smith says, I need to start my FAA now. I tried once, but it didn't turn out right. How much do I recommend for small gardens for a growing season? What I recommend, how much you need for a small garden for a growing season, is you don't need that much of it. Maybe a liter of this stuff, maybe a half gallon, maybe a gallon. It depends how you define small garden. To some people, small gardens are way bigger than I think. Some people, it's just like 10 square feet or something. So it's hard to say on that. However, if you go and make it today and go make a 5 gallons buckets worth, and you store it, it gets more and more potent as you store it over time. So I've had batches here at this farm that are over 7 years old, and they are so smooth, so good, that we actually use these batches in cooking. So we'll mix it into a stir fry, mix it into the kimchi, into burger meat, Sue's saying, and it makes all these things so delicious. And especially where I think this is something I want to eat more of, because I understand how these aminos rebuild DNA and bring this youthfulness back. And sometimes I fear I'm turning into an old man. I got like wrinkles on my forehead and stuff, so I gotta like drink more of this, and apparently some yeast to help break these things down and synthesize these things. But there is yeast in the FAA, especially as it gets older. There is lactobacillus. There are those microbes in there keeping it preserved. And so those are what, so I recommend, even though you may not need that much this year, go and make a 5 gallon bucket of it, because you can always pour it off later. A 5 gallon bucket will render probably 2.5 gallons of, or yeah, maybe about 2 gallons or so of usable fish amino acid, maybe a bit more depending on what type of fish you use and where it's from and how, all those things. But you will benefit by making it now and having it later, even if you only need a little bit. So the question Next question was on the IMO 3. I'm glad I already talked about that. And the 4. And this question here from Shaman King. Do you agree with the theory that using any sprayer where you pressurize a compost tea or any solution kills or destroys the biology? So from what I've on the question of what sprayer and how much for the biology, I just want to get one thing out there first, is that when I'm spraying things, I'm not that worried about the biology itself. Usually what I'm doing is I'm putting out IMO 4 as a solid bokashi, so like a thing that I spread as a dust there. Then what I'm doing with the sprayer is I'm spraying the like liquids, like maintenance solution, and leaf solution, my puberty solution. Like, I'm not worried about the biology per se through the pressurized pump. However, I do want to address that I've heard, and I should find the scientific studies, is that it's not so much about the pressurization of the pump itself, it's about the impact. So if I'm spraying and it's coming out as a light mist and it's lightly landing on my leaves, that's going to be okay for the biology, versus spraying it where it's hitting the plant and bouncing off. That's going to really destroy the biology. So I don't have scientific data on that or anything. That's just what I've heard. In my case, I'm not trying to usually spray out too much biology. I'm more putting the biology out and then giving them foods to feed them, and the supplemental feeds those ways. So if you are doing a big compost tea, I'm sure there's plenty of compost tea research to look this up, and if you do find something, link it to me. Maybe I can share it next time, so that way we can share and get good science on this. And oftentimes when I'm like, if for instance I make a Jadam microbe solution, which I call disgustingly cheap microbes, I'll just drench that out with a watering can. So the biology that I'm putting out in areas, I'm not trying to spray it. I'm just drenching it. I'm just putting it out. It's happening those ways. So, and I guess part of that is maybe my fear of killing the biology through the pump. But I'm not sure if the highly pressurized things do it. I know when you're making compost tea, you don't want to have a pump that's grinding your biology up, especially if you're trying to go for a fungally oriented compost tea, because that's why I use an airlift, because I don't have that same grinding thing, because you want fungal strands to grow, and then you don't want to grind those up. So there's a bit of caveats here in compost tea and destroying biology and what equipment you're using. And then Austin's saying it does for sure. So yeah, I just be careful on all that. Find some scientific literature, try it yourself, spray it, put it under the microscope, see. Something I just haven't done yet. If you grow indoor, so GoPro is asking, if you grow indoors and correctly recycle waste, water hydroponics with salts, it's amazing. No, outdoors are good for nature. Yeah, they will survive high pressure, but not like a turbine. Yeah, so GoPro is verifying kind of what I was saying. You don't want the turbine to, like, the pump to smash it. But not the pump pressure. So I think it is okay on that. So in Healing Earth is saying that I hope my IMO 3 hasn't been stored too long, about 4 to 6 months. Plan on making IMO 4 with it in 2 months. It's fine. Just look at it, see if you're starting to get bugs and things in there. But I do recommend next time you do this to do it a bit quicker. There's more vitality. Like I was talking earlier, someone was saying their IMO 4 didn't kick off fully. As that stuff starts to break down, it doesn't turn into your soil living microbes, and they don't hibernate. They're still active. There's still food source around them, which is the whole reason to go from IMO 3 to IMO 4, is you're taking what was growing in this food source, and then you're tuning it to learn how to eat your soil, which is what those microbes are going to be eating in your field anyway. They're not going to be eating a bunch of mill run or that kind of stuff out there. Okay, so apparently if you look up Tim Wilson, you can find more on the pump pressure sprayer. So get to couple more questions here, and then so how long can labs be stored in the fridge, and how long if mixed with sugar? So if you're going to store LAB, the lactic acid bacteria, in the fridge, for sure 1 month is good. As you start to go beyond 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, the amount of lactobacillus, the long sticks that you find under the microscope, start to decline. Now, whether it's a pleomorphic thing and they're changing into other biology, I'm not entirely sure. But they do start to lose their rod shape. So they go down. However, if you do super saturate it with the sugar, not only is it better for digestion and better when you use it and keeps them stronger, they also last longer because you're tying up that water and you're tying up the amount and ability they have to grow with each other. So I always recommend super saturating unless you're going to use it immediately. If you're going to do any type of storage, super saturated, it's even better for you to ingest as a human being and to use later in your solutions. So I want to thank you guys for joining in today. There are a couple more questions which I'll get to. Start with these next time. There is one last thing that I wanted to talk about, and that's somebody, I got an email here, let me pull it up, that last time I was talking about the like monocropping. I didn't get to the Facebook questions, sorry guys. Let's see. So last time I was talking about monocropping, and then I got a YouTube comment where a guy in Brazil was saying that he didn't want the the monocropping, and I just want to put a caveat out there that I'm not encouraging folks to go cut down a diverse forest and start monocropping. By no means is that like what I'm advocating, because it's not. But what I am advocating is that if you are doing high intensity agriculture already, you can continue to monocrop. If you're bringing in the IMOs, you're bringing in these plant juices, you're bringing in these things. But I always think that, as you're done with the day, spray that biology out so you create diversity. Try to increase the diversity in your forest. Always try to replant. Planting forests, getting the natural systems to go are going to benefit us in the long run. So I just want to be clear on that I'm not advocating to go cut down the forest and put it into KNF monoculture, even if it's better than regular monoculture. I am advocating, however, for these ideas of, existing agriculture. Let's improve that. Let's get things growing. Let's get things better. And one last little bit here is I wanted to give you guys just a message from our sponsors. We this actual presentation is now sponsored by the Pure KNF Foundation and viewers like you. So if you want to get on there next time, super chat, hook it up, makes it well worth my time. But this and all these presentations of the office hours are at knfsupport.com, and that is our foundation's support website. It's where we answer more questions. It's where we're building a KNF community to help each other and to recognize experts in the community. So if you want to check that out, and then also if you want to help me out specifically and you want to help yourself out, check out knffarm.com and come out to the farm to get training here at the farm. There's nothing like learning in person, tasting, seeing, being integrated into this for a full week. And so we got a lot of good things happening at knffarm.com, those opportunities. So I want to thank you for just letting me do a little bit of sponsorship stuff. If you've lasted this long, you're definitely into KNF, so supporting our community and making that happen. So want to wish you a great November. Hoping it's growing for you guys. We'll see you next week, Sunday again, and be back for more office hours. So thanks for tuning in. Long live the natural farmer. Aloha.